Happy Sabbath, New Hope family. My name is Donna McCatty, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for a really special interview of our new pastor, Everton Ennis. And I know we were expecting to see his lovely wife, Sister Ingrid Ennis, this afternoon, but unfortunately, she's not going to be able to join us today. So I just wanted to put out there that hopefully I'll have a chance to do a part two exclusive sit down session with Sister Ennis in the near future. So, Pastor, just remind Sister Ennis about that later on. And, Pastor, I just want to say that we are so fortunate to have this opportunity to sit down together and use this time to really get to know you a little bit better. And I hope that as time progresses, we are afforded like some additional chances to speak to you one on one and learn more about your lives, both of you and Sister Ennis, and the path that's brought you to New Hope and to us. So, how do you feel about that?
Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you for joining us. And just a reminder to everyone out there, we would love to hear from you as well. So, Pastor is more than willing to answer any questions that you may have as we go throughout the interview. So, please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll make sure to find some time to get to them before the end of today's session. So, without further ado, I would love to jump right into this interview. And, Pastor, I'm going to just ask you a really general question, but I think it's really important. We've all seen the beautiful bio of you and Sister Ennis, but those are just words on paper. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background, your education, and just how you found your way to where you are right now in life.
Thank you, Donna. It's a privilege to come to you live this afternoon, New Hope family, and those who are watching who are not yet a part of the New Hope family. It's good to be able to just kind of get to know you and vice versa. I was born in the country of Jamaica in Kingston sometime in the 60s. And life, of course, being a city boy, had its own ups and downs, its turnarounds, and so forth. And over the course of time, we, lived in different places there in Jamaica, went off to school to what was then known as West Indies College back in '89. And did not finish there, but migrated a couple of years later. But prior to going there, I came into the church at age 20 years old. I was 20. I had an earlier experience with the Seventh Adventist Church because of my grandmother, my father's mother, who you'll hear me talk about quite a bit. And in 1987, when I was 20 years old, the beginning of that year, there was a major evangelistic meeting in our community where we lived at the time in St. Elizabeth, a place called Goshen, St. Elizabeth. And my grandmother, it was, who, after all those years of me not going to a church because we had moved away, my parents were not Christians, so we didn't have that foundation and support at that time. And the Lord brought my grandmother to visit, and she invited me to the meeting, huge tent evangelistic campaign. And I went, not because I was interested in God or church, but I love my grandmother, and so I did it to just please her. And the Lord had set up an ambush for the Holy Spirit. And when I got there, the only thing the preacher didn't do that night was call me by my name. But the Lord was calling me by my name. And so I was like the third person down front when the appeal came at the end of the sermon that night in response to the call for baptism. This was after they had already preached for a whole month and baptized 100 people. And so this was the first night of the fifth week of the campaign. And this was March 1, 1987. And so later that same week, I was baptized. I went to the evangelistic meeting for 1 week from Sunday to Sabbath. I was baptized on Sabbath because the seed had already been sown in me since childhood that never left. And the Lord used my grandmother to have that seed sown, and then used her in my at 20 years old to reignite my interest in things of God. And that week, the Lord was just ready. And so you asked about how did I get here? Well, on my baptismal date, which was March 7, 1987. So in just a few weeks, I'll be celebrating the 35th anniversary of my baptism. I do that every single year. And I encourage you, if you have not really thought about your baptismal date, I'd like for you to look up your baptismal certificate and make it a date of meaning every year. It was the best decision you ever made, and so I'd encourage you to make that something that a legacy in your life. Anyway, while I was standing in the baptismal pool, and the preacher had his hand up. The one who did the evangelistic campaign was not in the pool with me. The pastor of the district that was doing this evangelistic meeting, the Santa Cruz Circuit of Churches, he was in the baptismal pool, and he had his hand raised there, pronouncing the blessing to baptize me. And the voice of God spoke distinctly. He said, "This is what I want you to do for the rest of your life." And I laughed out loud. And if there were some folk under that tent who were judgmental, they would have completely missed it. They probably have thought, why are they baptizing him? He's not ready. He's not serious. But nobody knew why I laughed. I laughed because it was the craziest thing I ever heard in my life. This is what I want you to do for the rest of your life. And if you get to know me real good, you're not one of the shyest person you'll ever meet. And so when the thought came, there's just no way I could see myself standing up before all these people and saying I'm preaching. And so I was like Sarah. I laughed. And nonetheless, it 2.5 years of trying to run, it was an exercise in futility. And finally, I gave in and gave up, and here I am today.
I love that. I love that story, Pastor. And it's funny because you did the math for me. You said 35 years, and I was doing the math in my head. And if you don't mind, I'd love for you to tell me, like, where were you at in your life 35 years ago? Like, what was going on? I mean, even today's sermon, you were talking about bringing the youth back into the church. And I want to help, if you could help us understand what that kind of struggle felt like, where you had this calling from God, but you also were, you were young, right? And we're not always willing to turn our lives over and make those changes, because to walk the path of God is difficult, right? It's not an easy path. I would love for you to be able to share that with us and let us know
how
that
easy path. Absolutely. And I thank you for asking that, because I never forget one of the last things I remember to this day doing before my grandmother invited me to come to this meeting with her that Sunday night. I went fishing. I went down to a certain river nearby where we lived, and some cousins of mine, and we went fishing. And I remember spending most of that day in the previous week fishing, and didn't catch much, but we caught enough. And sometimes I feel like the Apostle Peter, Lord found him fishing. But at 20 years old, I was at a stage in life that was next to being a statistic. Had some terrible experiences in my high school experience. Didn't go to an Adventist school. I didn't know anything about going to an Adventist school until I went to college. It's one of those things I've always looked back and said, I wished I had a different elementary and high school experience because of the issues I had. Because I believe, so I think, we weren't, the richest people in our community, or I wasn't the richest kid who showed up at school. I was treated a bit differently.
Right.
And teachers made certain decisions that affected me for many years. I won't go in all the specifics now, but I just kind of hit those of you who are from the islands would know, and especially if you're from Jamaica, when you're in the public school system, that at least back then, I don't know what's happening now, the teacher pretty much determined what kind of examinations you'll do and what courses you're going to sit in the external exams. And a decision was made on my behalf that I was going to do basic English, though I never failed an English test in my whole life. Though we were poor, my mom insisted that we speak English. It was always one of my favorite subjects. And I never could understand. And when I went to the teacher, all kinds of excuses were given. I chose to do business in high school. When we got to the end of the 9th grade to choose the courses to go into the 10th grade, I chose a straight business stream. I always wanted to be an accountant. And when we started 10th grade, I chose all business, typing, shorthand, principles of business, principles of accounting, etc. I wanted to be an accountant. We were poor. I wanted to make money. I wanted to take care of my family. I wanted to build my parents a house. I'm the first of, at that time, it was first of 4 children. It's now first of 6. But I had ambition, I had drive, I had a plan for life. And that was not supported by the people to whom my future was entrusted. It left me bitter as a young man. It left me angry. It left me on the verge of some really bad things, and which spiraled after I left high school. And God, at that time, by the time I was 20 years old, I was really close to being a statistic
Mhm.
there in Jamaica. And God, in His mercy, and seeing that He could make something out of my brokenness, He could make something out of this life that other people didn't give a chance.
Mhm.
Um, and so, give you an example. When I showed up for my accounting class, there were so many students, nearly 60 students in this one teacher's class. And she decided that um, she couldn't teach that many students. I didn't blame her. But then instead of them checking the record to see what kind of stream or what kind of vocational ambition each student had, it seems like they did something back then called eeny, meeny, miny, mo as to who's going to remain in the class.
Yeah.
And she said, those whose name I call will remain in the class. The rest of you will have to choose between this subject and that subject. The alternative subject was metalwork instead of accounting.
Mm.
I had no interest in metalwork, but my name was not called. And I knew she made a mistake. So I was calm. I've always been the one to be calm. So I waited, and after she was done, I walked up to her desk and I said, Miss, we call our teachers Miss or Sir. And I said, you didn't call my name. She looked at her thing and she said, yes, you have to go and do metal work. I said, but I want to be an accountant.
Oh,
That didn't make a difference to her.
yeah.
I went home crying. My parents had me go to the principal's office the next morning to explain to the principal. The principal looked at me and said, I'm sorry, but that's the teacher's decision.
Mhm.
That was the story of my life. From wanting to be an accountant to being told I need to go and do metal work.
Mhm.
And then to make matters worse, at that time in my life, I was already socially conscious. Because I'm from a family that's engaged politically and whatnot. And so these kind of things were sensitive to me. And I looked at the people who were allowed to stay in the accounting class.
Mhm.
A lot of them didn't look like me. And
Right.
their surnames didn't line up with mine, and their bank accounts and so forth. So you pay attention to that kind of stuff. The very next day in the typing class, the same thing happened. I never forget. 18 typewriters. I shall never forget. 18 typewriters, what we call the typing lab. Some of these kids have no idea what I'm talking about because they got tablets and laptops now. All right.
Right.
And there was nearly 50 people. There were nearly 50 people in the typing class. And it was clear as Crystal, there is no way this class was going to work. Oh, same
Mhm.
thing again. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But I chose straight business. I was forced to do physics instead of typewriting
Wow.
and do metal work instead of principles of accounting.
Right.
And so I was very bitter. I hated education. I hated school. I greatly disliked teachers because my life was robbed.
Right.
And I didn't have parents who felt empowered to go and fight on my behalf. Society relegates you to a certain status where you stay in that corner where we put you. And so you will find as you get to know me better at New Hope, one person once described me as an activist.
Mhm.
Marty Schneider, who is the wife of the late Don Schneider, president of the North American division. Marty and I worked at the seminary together. And Marty, there was an experience I had, and somebody referred to me as an activist. And Marty, when she came and she said, Ennis, you're not an activist, you're an activator. And so I tell people I'm an activator. I
Later.
make things happen. I get things to happen. And I bring
Mhm.
that kind of energy to pastoral ministry. And so for young people out there who are watching this broadcast this afternoon, I want them to know that there are times, unfortunately, when it will appear, and I know my parents are in my corner, but my parents are not empowered people who
Right.
think that they could go and take on the system. And there are so many youth who found themselves in the same situation that I did growing up as a young man in Jamaica. And today we're seeing the fallout from that. There's been a generational thing. It's the crime and the violence and the anger and the impulse, the quickness to pull a knife or a gun or to get into a fight, because unfortunately our society breeds the violence. There's lots of abuse, emotional, physical abuse, and social abuse, which is what I suffered,
Right.
because somebody determined what my future is going to be. And so by the time I was 20, after having left high school and whatnot, and trying to get a job and not really having any fulfillment because it wasn't what I had a passion for, um, then you start making decisions that are not in the best interest of yourself or anybody else, because you just kind of you give up. And again, at this point, I'm not in the church. I'm not a Christian. I've never been one at this point. So you don't have that kind of, um, you leave your parents' home, you're grown in a strict manner. But once you leave, in my case, within 1 year, I left at 19, headed
Mm-hmm.
west to St. Elizabeth. That's where most of my family was, in St. Elizabeth at that time. And I headed west, and I'm launching out to say I'm going to look for and make a life. And then ran into the reality: you don't make a life without an education.
Right.
And
Right.
so one thing led to another. And by the time the Lord touched me on my shoulder at 20 years old, I straight messed up.
Oh.
And God, in His mercy, is why
Mhm.
I'm here today. Because I could have been dead. I could have been in prison somewhere. It could have been worse. But I thank God today. So I want young people from New Hope to understand that even when it seems that there is no hope, God is still in your corner. You might not realize He's there, but He's there. I want you to know that. And others might write you off, and others might think there's nothing in you worth investing in. But I want you to know what made the difference in my life is this church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
You know,
This,
I was thinking that because the one thing that you said, that your future was entrusted to these teachers, and we feel that way, but it's not. Our future, we have control over our future, but we also have a father that's looking out for us and has our best interest in heart. And so, even though you were on this path, it's so amazing and so beautiful to know that with the help of your grandmother and different things that came about, you were able to make this amazing pivot and shift in your life because of your relationship with God. And
yeah,
I think that's the moral of this story. They didn't have control. They thought they had control over your
that's
life,
right.
but they don't have the final say. So I'm so happy we asked that one question, because I just learned so much about you. And I think there's so many people that that's their story. I have a not similar, but just a path away and a path back. And I think we can all relate to that in some way, shape, or form. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
But you know what, Donna? Also, when I
Mhm.
came into the church at 20 years old, it was rough.
Yeah.
Um, my beginning years in the church were rough,
Hmm.
because, as I mentioned, there was a massive evangelistic meeting. There was no church in our area, no Adventist church, and so this particular event campaign was being done to start a church, and which it did. At the end of the
Hmm.
campaign, there were 123 of us in total baptized in that meeting, and some folk came from the Santa Cruz Church and so on. And Brother Townsend at our church, his relative was one of the leaders that came. That was seconded, so to speak, to be a leader in our church, because all of us were new, and so and we're part of that district of churches, that circuit. But some of the folk who we were all baptized, they were the grown people. Let me tell you, some of the stuff I talked about today at New Hope, I want people to hear me clearly. Um, Sometimes we just don't know how to relate to our youth. And the reason why is because we sometimes forget that we were young. And I hope no one is hearing me say that we're talking about compromising standards and principles. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about in how we communicate that, and in how we seek to nurture that and to encourage that in our children and our young people. Because if we're overly harsh, and especially if we haven't really built a relationship and we haven't tried to reason as opposed to just rushing people, it can do irreversible damage within a year. Within a year, almost half of the young people were gone from this brand new
Mhm.
church plant. Gone. I say gone. Many of them have not returned in 35 years.
Wow.
And that has never stopped bothering me because I also almost left. On two
Mhm.
occasions, I almost left, but the Lord kept me. And so you find I have a passion for youth. I have a passion. I became very quickly the AY assistant leader. I became the Pathfinder director for the church. I then
Mhm.
became an officer in the St. Elizabeth Youth Federation. I was a treasurer for a while. In fact, just before I went off to college, I was the treasurer. And then
Mhm.
when I migrated to the Bahamas, my passion for youth, I became the father, the founding father, so to speak, the one who promoted the idea through conference leadership and created federations in the Bahamas Conference at that time before we separated North and South Bahamas. And so I became the president of the Grand Bahama Youth Federation. So I have a SWAT, I'm an invested master guide. So
Mhm.
young people are
Yeah.
core and center to what I do. And I've never ceased from doing that.
I love that, and I have the same passion for our youth. I think it's really important for us to foster those seeds and nurture their relationship too, so that we can keep them within the church. So I'm going to turn our questioning a little bit over to your life a little bit more about how you really, and we heard the whole story of you being baptized and being called by the Lord, but to become a pastor, you said that you kind of dodged this calling for 2 years. What was the breaking point for you? What really made you say, it's my time. I need to serve this. I've got to do what God
Okay.
asked me to do.
Now, that's funny you would ask that because I was baptized in 87
Hmm.
and it's March 5. I'm in the baptismal pool about to be baptized. The
Hmm.
pastor's hand is raised and the Lord clearly spoke and said, "This is what I want you to do for the rest of your life." I bust out laughing. It was the craziest thing I ever heard. And for the next 2.5 years, I was running, running, running. In 1989, and some of you who are perhaps watching this, there's a lay preacher, very famous lay preacher in Jamaica at that time, Fitz Henry. Fitz Henry was coming to Santa Cruz to do a major evangelistic campaign. All of the churches in our district, by now we're 7 churches in this Santa Cruz circuit, and they were all pitching in to have this major evangelistic meeting in Santa Cruz. It's going to be on the grounds of the Santa Cruz Church that was still being built in front of St. Elizabeth Technical High School, Stets. And so massive. Um, so the Bible workers came to town, several of them from different parts of the country, and the conference had intern pastors at that time who also served in Bible work, and so they dispatched a Bible worker to each of the churches in the district to preach on the Sabbath before the campaign started. And a gentleman from Old Harbor in St. Catherine by the name of Victor Newell. I've never seen him since this time. Victor
Hmm.
Newell was his name. I wish I could find that guy. And he was the Bible worker. Let me back up. The Thursday before that Sabbath, there's a sister in our church. I regard her as my church mother, and she sold in the market there in Santa Cruz. And the Thursday, I was canvassing at this time. By the way, if you're trying to run for ministry, the worst thing in your life that you could do is be a literature evangelist. That's just the wrong thing to do if you're trying to run for pastoral ministry. But nobody told me. I was set up, y'all. So, so, uh, so this particular Thursday, I went down by the market. And we sat down and we're talking, and I told her that something I hadn't told anybody else. I didn't tell my canvassing partner. I didn't tell anybody what I told her that Thursday. I confessed that for over 2 years, I
Hmm.
had been struggling, and I was struggling spiritually also.
Hmm.
Because guilt was killing me because I was running from the ministry.
Oh, wow.
I was running from the ministry.
Hmm.
All this time, I'm still trying to be an accountant. I'll tell you, I went to school at night at Stets and did accounting, principal accounting in
Hmm.
1 year,
Hmm.
and passed the CXC exam with a great a general one in principal accounting. That's the highest grade you can get in the
Okay.
exam. And so I'm poised now. I'm like, yes, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go to college. And every time I try to go, the dollar sign was an impediment.
Yeah.
Um, So I'm sitting, I'm talking to this sister, and I said to her these words. I said, I feel like Jonah in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm running away from God, and I feel like I'm sinking spiritually because I know what God told me to do the day I was being baptized, and I don't want to do it.
Wow.
I don't want to do it. And she prayed with me. That's the Thursday afternoon. Sabbath,
Yeah.
I showed up at church. There's this person, and they said he's under the Bible workers. He's from Old Harbor,
Mm-hmm.
Victor Newell. So I announced the opening hymn that Sabbath on the worship program. Another person was doing the scripture reading. Back then, they write down the stuff on a pad. You don't have computers in the church. There's no email. So you don't know what's going to happen until you get to church. You don't know what they're
Uh-huh.
going to ask you to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
they assigned me to do the opening hymn. I did that, sat down, and then the person got up and did the scripture reading. And the person got up and was doing the scripture reading and opened to the book of Jonah and
Wow.
started to read. And
Mm-hmm.
I looked out in the congregation at the sister, and I'm at the point of tears. And
Mm-hmm.
she looked at me, just the two of us communicating like this. Nobody in the congregation knows what's going on between me and her. And this is what she did. She smiled and she did this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It was over.
Yeah.
It was over at that moment. I had to yield. I had to yield. And there's much more to that, but the church would eventually learn after a while. But that was how, that was the turning point.
Mm-hmm.
That was a turning point, and I experienced a spiritual release in the
Yeah.
sense that I didn't any longer feel this burden. I didn't feel this guilt because now I was in the will of God.
I love that. And I will say this, Pastor. I love the fact that you still pursued your accounting. I think there's a message there that even though someone tried to take you off that path, you were still able to do that. And I also think that it's given you skills that you can tie into what you're doing now. So there's nothing wrong with still going after your education, still taking that path to the things that you thought you needed in life, but also listening to God and following what He wanted for you. I love the fact that you were kind of able to figure out how to make all of that work for you in leadership. Actually, that's the way I'm looking at it now. So it's funny. I was talking to my husband and we were talking about the questions, and I said to him, I want to ask Pastor, what does a day in the life look like for a pastor? And he said, yeah, what does Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday look like? Because we all know about Sabbath, we know about Sunday, we know about Wednesday night prayer meeting, but just can you tell us really quickly, like, what are the other days of the week? If you had to like just really encapsulate what a normal day looks like for you. And I know there's no normalcy in your world because you hear all, you see all, you are, you know, I'll be calling you probably one day telling you something out of the blue. So I know you get different people coming at you in different ways and shapes and forms, but I would love to hear, and I think we'd all love to hear like what a day typically looks like for you.
As I mentioned earlier today, I was allegedly on vacation for the past 10 days. But there's so many people at New Hope who could testify
Mm-hmm.
that they were in meetings with me or
Yeah.
I was in meetings with them. There were people having challenges. You
Mm-hmm.
respond. And because we didn't take off and go to Hawaii, we kind of got stuck.
Oh,
so, uh,
wow.
so
Yeah.
here I was, really needing the rest too, because transitioning from one district to another and no break at
Yeah.
all. Literally from one week I was out and the other week I was in. Nonetheless, weeks are or days are meetings of different kinds.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes things have to interact with the conference leadership on.
Yeah.
Members have needs that half the needs other people don't know about because what is said to me goes with me to my grave unless it's something
Right.
that we agree that can be repeated in some context. Um, Planning and preparing for the upcoming weekend. Just today, I said to a few folk that there's a committee I'm going to be putting together. I won't announce it on here, but we'll
Mm-hmm.
announce it otherwise. That's going to help me to enhance the work that I'm supposed to do. And sermon preparation is a
Yeah.
days long thing. You're researching, you're preparing for meetings. I'm somebody I'm highly optimized when it comes to organization. I
Mm-hmm.
You will not get me come to a meeting and not know what I'm supposed to do or where we're at. Um, I like things done a certain way. Excellence is the standard. And so a lot of my time, brain power is invested in just getting things lined up. I interact a lot with my leaders. Head elder of any church I pastor is my wingman, and
Hmm.
we work very closely together. We are constantly in contact. I'm a communication person, and
Yes.
so New Hope should get ready for just a deluge of interaction on in that regard. Email, text messaging, because I believe the church can't be too much informed. In fact, one of the cries I've already heard, we don't know what's going on. Well, where's your email? Put your email in the thing. So,
Hmm.
of course, I have family. You can't count your family duties out, and
Right.
to make sure that you're taking care of what needs to happen on the home front. And you have your extended family that you're mindful of, and so forth and so on. In addition to that, I my ministry extends beyond the local church that I pastor. As I
Right.
mentioned before, I'm a community engaged pastor. And so I interact with so many different people across the spectrum of the community, the county, people with the city, people with different organizations, apart, nonprofits and so forth that I'm a part of. And I'm in the process of now lining up who I need to engage with in DeKalb County in that regard.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, I'm engaged with different responsibilities I have from the conference side of it. I'm not the
Right.
conference elected official, but I'm president of the Georgia Ministerial Association of the South Atlantic Conference. So all the pastors, some 44 pastors in Georgia, that's our team, and so they have asked me to be the leader. And so we're constantly having programs for our executive committee, the state meetings, and I'm also president and CEO of the Institute for Pastoral Community Engagement, which is an outgrowth of Georgia Ministerial Association, because
Hmm.
of seeking to make sure that we equip our pastors with both the impetus and the know-how of being the pastor for the entire community and not just the local church. How do we exert an influence? How do we become influencers and thought leaders in that community, whether we live there or not? But as long as we pastor there, how do we come alongside the people who are getting it done so that we can be the representative of our local church, the Adventists, who are usually missing from the table? The
Hmm.
Adventists are usually missing from the table. And that's what I got sick and tired of. Our millennials have been asking, where's our church? How come our
Hmm.
church hasn't released a statement when black folk get killed in these streets out here and so forth? I understand what they're really asking for. They're not asking really for Elder Alex Brand from the North American Division or Ted Wilson from the GC to issue a statement. That's what they say, but that's not what they mean. Because the
Hmm.
truth of the matter is, when you stop and you think about it, a statement from them doesn't mean anything to the people in these streets. Those people don't know them like that.
Right.
Even some of our members wouldn't read that statement. So the real issue is, where is the local church? And so when I looked at this with the killing of George Floyd a couple of years ago, my anger boiled over into, we got to do something. Again, like Nehemiah,
Hmm.
it's not enough to be angry. It's not enough to weep and mourn. It's not
Yes.
enough to pray. You got to do something. And so I talked to some people, some thought leaders in our church, and we put this thing together. I was blessed by the conference. In fact, Elder Winston and I have a conversation right now about the next step, what's next with regard to this organization. So I'm very involved at the local church level. I serve on the union executive committee. I have the privilege of being on there since 2016 and or 2015. And so we're looking forward to the session coming up later on this year. We don't know what the Lord is going to do, but that's His business when the time comes. And
Right.
so it's very engaging. You have a pastor who I compartmentalize well. I'm tasked, and multitasking is pretty much. I don't think if I tried not to multitask now, it would be a miserable life because I'm used to it so much. And
Hmm.
because of how I'm structured and the way I think, I do get lots done. And that's because of phone calls, text messaging, because I'm always involving people and we're moving this thing forward.
I love that. And actually, you just answered another one of my questions. I wanted to know how you juggle it all, and I think that's a really good answer to that. And I think that's helpful for a lot of us because it's hard to compartmentalize, right? It's sometimes
Yes.
it all becomes mush, and we can't think through and we can't think clearly. So being able to do that, I know is instrumental. But you said a lot of things. Like I was like wow, there's so many things that you're involved in, and you're just one person. So I would love to ask, like, what are your expectations of your church and your congregation? How can we support you? How can we help you with these initiatives? How can we help to build your ministry?
I mentioned something at the church in the message today that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not at New Hope for New Hope to help me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at New Hope to help New Hope.
Okay. Okay.
But here's how it works. New Hope has to help me to help New Hope. That's the catch.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not a job for one person.
Right.
I'm going to say something else and I'll explain it later on in our conversation. Community engagement might be something that's hard for some of our members to wrap their minds around. How are we going to do that? There's only some
Mm-hmm.
enough. Well, let me tell you, our pastors much smaller churches than New Hope. I've never pastored a church the size of New Hope,
Yeah.
and we get a lot of stuff done. So size is not an issue for me.
Mm-hmm.
Size is not a deterrent. When you understand that there are needs, that the only solution to needs is to do something. See, praying is good, but you can't just pray about stuff.
Right.
We weep and then we mourn like Nehemiah, but at some point you got to get up and you got to do
And
something.
do. Mm-hmm.
All right. So size is not a deterrent. And I've demonstrated that throughout my ministry for 20 years. I've never pastored the largest churches. We get it done. So it's hard for me. I'm not the person you come to with excuses because it's hard for me to deal with excuses.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I don't want excuses. All I want is I want to see us make some difference in people's lives. So here's how we do that. I'm here to help New Hope to see what's possible and to identify the opportunities and to
Mm-hmm.
show New Hope how to capitalize on that. That's what I specialize in. And New Hope comes alongside that process, especially through our elected leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And we work together in supporting mutual support. I want to emphasize. Because
Right.
again, it's not Pastor Ennis doing the work and the church helping me or supporting me or praying for me. That's not the model we work on. We
Mm-hmm.
work on we work on we're a team. And when I look to my left or when I look to my right, I want to see my team members in the trenches with me.
Right.
They got to be in the trenches. All right. The pastoral staff heard me say there's no such thing as a lazy elder. If you're lazy, you can't be an elder on the team. If you're
Mm-hmm.
lazy, you can't be an officer of this church. Because I'm a working pastor, I'm a hardworking pastor, and I don't ask a church to do anything where I'm not present doing it myself. That's the kind of leader I am. All
I
right.
love
I don't
that.
sit in the office and say, y'all go do this. I'm out there doing it with you. So, how can New Hope help in this ministry? First of all, is to recognize that God has called all of us together to do the ministry, but within the context of Him leading a people, He has appointed leaders. And that's all I
Mm-hmm.
am. He just decided that you'll be the leader, but it's a team effort.
Right.
Right? It's a team effort.
I love that. Okay, so with that team effort and you being called to lead, I'm sure that you have thought about how you are going to establish change. We talked about that today in our sermon. You talked about it. Love that. But I'd love to hear about, if you don't mind, maybe just three top priorities that you have as you embark upon this new journey at New Hope. What three things would you really like to make a huge impact at our church?
I like that question, Donna, because, and I think the members appreciate you asking that question because everybody wants to know. All right. I mean, when Jesus showed up and uh, and John found himself in jail, and
Mhm.
Jesus didn't come, he sent his disciples to go ask Jesus, "Are you the one, or do we look for another?"
Exactly.
So they wanted to know,
Mhm.
and it's only fair that the members want to know what is Pastor Ennis going to do. What's his agenda? So I'm glad you asked. So here's the agenda that I'm coming in with. As I mentioned today with Nehemiah, Nehemiah, when he got to Jerusalem, was not clueless about what needed to be done. He already heard 5 months before um, what was happening there. So he had at least an idea before he got there as to what needed to be done. Now, when he got there for 3 days, he just kind of reposed where he was. And and I'm sure he had a crew that he pulled together, his brother Hanani being one of them, and they kind of looked over again in more finer detail. Okay, what really are the needs, and we want to make sure we're covering all the bases. And they came up with a strategic plan, a plan of action.
Right.
And so, as I learned I was coming to New Hope, this vote was taken on December 12th of last year. I was told this is what we're gonna send you, and and uh, and I got down to work. I started doing my
Mm-hmm.
research. What county is this a part of? And then I said, whoa, what's the city? There's no city, unincorporated Ellenwood. I didn't know Ellenwood was unincorporated. So I learned stuff. I'm learning stuff about the neighborhood. And then I called the conference, different people, and said, send me this and send me that. I want to see what the church is like. I want to see what they're doing already. I spoke with
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hollis, and I called the treasurer, and I called the clerk, and I said, please send me these records, and I want to see what kind of decisions that have been made the last 6 to 12 months to kind of get a sense of what was New Hope's priority. So you see, you look at what the people have been working on to get a sense of what you should be working on.
Right.
Tell you
Right.
some of the things that jumped out at me. Young people. I saw that there was a burden for the youth. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand what was going on until I had a meeting with the pastoral staff. And 11 out of 15 were on that Zoom with me. And when I asked, tell me your heart, what's your burden? What are your desires? What are your dreams? They said, thank you for asking that question. They opened up, and 10 out of the 11, the first thing out of their mouth was, we want our young people back.
Yeah.
I want this church to know that we have a pastoral staff that has a burden for our children.
Yes.
All right. And so when I looked at that, and with the effect that COVID has had with the shutdowns and so forth, so then I coined, the priority as member, getting our members and our momentum back. That's priority number one.
Mm-hmm.
Getting our members and our momentum back. So today I started saying, come on back to church. Come on back. And I'm
Right.
appealing to our children on the 19th of this month, 2 weeks from today at 6 o'clock. I'm going to have a Zoom with the youth, which is a 16 to 21 age group. And then
Mm-hmm.
at 7 o'clock, that's 2 weeks from today, we're going to have a meeting with the young adults from 22 to 30 years old on Zoom. Right. I want to have a conversation with them. So that's number one priority, getting our members and our momentum back. Second priority is this: community engagement. We have got to earn the respect, the
Mm-hmm.
appreciation, and the relevance of our neighbors, the
Yes.
people who live in Ellenwood and South DeKalb County. They need to know that we are a people who love the Lord, and we want to be a blessing to our community. I know that spirit already resides at New Hope. In my interactions, I already see that. But here's how I help. I help to take that to the next level, where the fact that we do help right now and that we want to help more, I'm here to say, here's how we can make it better.
Right.
Here's how we can take this to the next level. I've done it. This district I just left, two much smaller churches. You'd be amazed how what we did with creating the community resource centers has completely transformed the churches and
Mm-hmm.
transformed the communities around them. Everybody knows these two churches now that were almost unknown.
Right.
And so I know what it will do. And the question might be, well, it's kind of hard to get people at New Hope to do things because everybody's so busy. Let me tell you, the answer to that is, again, there are way a lot more people at New Hope than any church I've pastored before, and we got it done. But let
Right.
me tell you how else we got it done. We got it done as well through the involvement of interfacing with other organizations. And we have volunteers who come in because, like I said, I'm here to help New Hope. Here's how this works. New Hope has to help me to help New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
When we start being a blessing to the community in a larger sense, the community will come to our assistance so we can bless the community.
Yes.
They will come to volunteer. People start wanting to be partners and forming affiliations with us. I'm telling you what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. They will come to us and say, we'd like you to be on our board. We'd like to have a partnership with you. We'd like to come alongside you and join in what you're doing. Help will not be an issue. The reason why we don't have as much help now that we need is because we're doing it by ourselves.
Right.
And we have not acted on faith to kick it to the next level. Right? So the vision that we cast today was vision for what's next, not a vision for what we've been doing, which has been, you know, it's time to ramp it up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Time to ramp it up. And then the third priority is this: that multi-purpose room building.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at an aerial photograph on the website. I found it, which we're about to renovate. That website is it needs to be worked on. And I've been to New Hope before, but it didn't strike me like when I looked at it from a bird's eye perspective, a bird's view perspective. And I looked down at that thing. Somebody took a drone photograph, and I called my wife in my office here, and I said, look at this. I said, that's where we need to build the community resource center, right there between the church building and the building in the back. Next thing I know, I'm on the phone with Dr. Hollis, and he said, "Oh, Elder, I needed to know that the people." He said, "I wish I could have gotten it done during my tenure, but I know you're gonna come in. I wanted to know that there's a building that they've been wanting to build for years. I know you're gonna get them their building." I'm like, "They want to build a building where?" He said, "Right there between the sanctuary." I said, "What? You mean the same place I saw in the photograph?" And I said, so the Lord had already put that in my heart, and I did not know that you
Mm-hmm.
all had their plans that have been approved. And I'm like,
Yeah.
so then I learned that the mortgage was retired back in December. We're making plans now for the mortgage burning. And so praise the Lord that that church took that action. So it clears the way for us to take the necessary steps now. Next Sunday, when we have the board meeting, we're appointing a building committee, and
Mm-hmm.
to get cracking to revise and to resurrect those plans and move forward.
I love that. I think that's going to make a lot of people excited. And again, getting it ties right back to getting the members and the momentum back. I think all that is a nice, all three of those lend to each other. So I love the cohesiveness of those three priorities. All right, so Pastor, we're going to pivot for a second. I know that Sister Ennis couldn't join us, but we would love to just hear a little bit more about you two, the two of you. And I just have one really quick question. If you wouldn't mind telling us and sharing with us, just tell us the thing you love most about your wife.
I thought about that before, and
Hmm.
it's a number of things. So I will tell you one of them
Yeah.
is and I think some people saw that today. My wife is one of these people who wants to be and loves to be involved in ministry.
Hmm.
She will not come to New Hope and just sit.
Yeah.
And she is already involved with media ministry. We launched today the use of a worship presentation program called Proclaim that she has done over the years in the churches that we pastored. She does amazing stuff in terms of graphic design and making worship beautiful. We have an emphasis on making worship meaningful and making worship beautiful. And
Yeah.
what the aesthetics of worship, graphic work, and how things are presented online and on the screen in the sanctuary. And you saw some of that today, and that was just what a snippet of what is to come. There's more the church didn't see because the computer we streamed from today, we found out a little bit late that we weren't hooked up into the sound system to run the audio from what she was showing,
Mhm.
but she had videos and that stuff lined up for pre-service type stuff. And so she's not formally trained in that. That's just from passion for wanting to do something to make the worship service of God more beautiful and more
Right.
attractive. And so I really appreciate her contribution in that regard. There's a young man at the church. His name is Trey. There's several of them. Some little fellas and that we saw
Mhm.
today working in the media ministry. And I stood there, and Darwin was trying to talk to me. I'm just standing there watching him, and like, wow, he's 10. He's about 12. I'm like,
Yeah.
look at him go. And then Trey, he's a quick study, quick learner. He picked up on that thing, and she was able to show him a few things, and he got it just like that. And so I'm glad that she's able to pour into them and to help to bring that additional piece to what
Mhm.
media. We have an awesome media team at New Hope, and I'm excited for these guys. I'm glad to work with them. But I just know it's uh, I see Rochelle. You see what Rochelle is putting in there. So um, And there goes Darwin putting that up on the screen. I think that's a
Mhm.
conspiracy. But anyway, the so she brings that she brings that passion to want
Mhm.
to lend support. Over the years, she has done in churches that we've like started from the ground up. She has been clerk, she has been Sabbath school superintendent, she has been praise team leader. Don't tell anybody I said that because of some illness situation. She hasn't done that in a few years, but
Wow.
but
Mhm.
but she just has a passion for God and His work, and I
Oh,
truly appreciate and admire that.
I love that, and I love the fact that she has so many roles, and she obviously has her degree, but then she's become so proficient in all of these other aspects of her life that have been able to really help nurture and your ministry and help it flourish. But then I'm looking at you, Pastor, and I'm seeing that you personally have a doctorate and it's in conflict resolution. I saw that in my reading, and you're also an author and you have a book. And I was wondering, is that book also on conflict resolution?
Yes, the book is on conflict resolution. It is partly the result of my doctoral work as well as years of pastoral experience and teaching conflict resolution. I do workshops, seminars, training sessions for churches, for conferences, for other organizations. Um, my doctoral emphasis ended up being in the area of conflict ministry because when I came into pastoral ministry 20 years ago,
Mhm.
it was interesting. I found out within 2 weeks that I was not prepared to
Yeah.
pastor the churches out here because I knew a bunch about Greek and I knew a lot about Hebrew and my minor coming out of Oakwood with biblical languages. So I knew how
Mhm.
to parse the Greek and do all that stuff and how to use the resources to understand the various nuances concerning one Hebrew word to pull the meaning out to preach a sermon. I knew church administration. I knew church policy. I relish in that kind of stuff. I'm a policy
Right.
person. But when I got to my district, I ended up calling the conference president and said, why didn't anybody tell me I was coming to a war zone? I mean, it was, and pardon my French, but it was a living hell.
Mm.
And so,
Mhm.
um, and then of course, it shouldn't have been a surprise because I mean, I've been in the church.
Yeah.
I've been in the church for a number of years and been in the church in 3 different countries. And I don't know why it was a surprise, but it was. I mean, maybe it was a surprise because I'm on it. Well, what did I do?
Mm.
See?
Mhm.
So you and then I found when I did my homework that church stuff is happening in churches, and within 90 days there are people who are so skillful they make it look like it's you,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
been there before you got there. Nonetheless, 3.5 years into that experience, the Lord gave me favor and turn that thing around, and there were enough people in the conference who realized that it had turned around because the particular church, I'm not going to name the church, the particular church was known. That church had a nickname which I nobody told me when I was going there. And
Right.
so when folks saw what were happening, colleagues, they were like, wow. And
Mm.
one guy back in 2006 invited me down to Atlanta here to do a workshop for him and his church because of some issues. And that's where my emphasis, my teaching ministry, which I now call Class Act Seminars, that's where it began,
Mhm.
September 2006. And then that interest blossomed into wanting to learn more because I saw that I was underprepared, I was ill-equipped to deal with church conflict. As something that our audience, our viewers should understand. In none of our schools is this part of the curriculum.
Right.
You would think they would be teaching us how to deal with church conflict. It's not there. It wasn't there in undergrad. It was not there at the seminary.
Why do you think, Pastor? Why do you
Because we sometimes we can have an ostrich mentality with burying our
Mhm.
head in the sand. We make the assumption that because these folk are Christian, they know how to get along.
Right.
But that's not true. And I found out, and I had to learn the hard way. It's not true. Something else I was told that is not true. And I've told preachers, who I mentor, I said, forget that nonsense. It's not true.
Mhm.
You're told that, well, just go on and you love the people and they love you right back. That ain't true. I'm telling you now, it's not true. For some people, it's true. But the fact
Mhm.
that you love people, the point I'm making, the fact that you love people is not a guarantee somebody's not gonna abuse you.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, think about it. Jesus, what did he ever do? Look
Mm.
what happened to him.
Yeah.
All right. So, and I'm nowhere as great as Jesus. I'm not even great.
All right. Well, Pastor, I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to ask you one final question, and then Adrian, I'm putting this out there right now. I would love for us to be able to do a part two because this has been so informative for all of us, Pastor. I've just loved and enjoyed getting to know you in this short span of time. But I want to know what brings you the greatest joy as a pastor and a leader of the church.
The greatest joy is
Mhm.
to see people experience the assurance of salvation.
Yeah.
Most of us don't have the assurance of salvation.
Mm.
I can tell you from you always hear me say 35 years being a Christian, living in 3 different countries. I tell you that our people struggle.
Yeah.
Our people struggle. I used to struggle with self-doubt. I used to question if I'm a Christian. There are so many people who do it. And if you walk into a typical Adventist room and ask the question, how many of you are saved? How many of you know you're saved? Those hands are not going up.
Mhm.
They're not going up. And most of the few that go up, they're going up real slow because they're wondering if they're blaspheming by raising their hand. And I want people to understand that unless we have and unless we experience the assurance of salvation, there is no way that we can ever experience the joy of salvation.
Mhm.
I'm at New Hope to help people to understand you can have fun, you can have a good time in your relationship in the Lord. It doesn't have to be about misery and doubt and self condemnation and condemnation of others. I
Right.
want people to know that um, perfection is not a requirement for salvation. Let me say that again. Perfection is not a requirement for salvation. But too many of us have been taught bad theology. Too many of us have been taught that being saved depends on our ability to obey. And
Mhm.
when we find that we cannot obey, it drives us to want to harm ourselves and harm others through our harshness. We are not saved by our ability to obey. We are saved by grace through faith in Christ Jesus. It's not of works, lest any of us would be able to boast about the call, well, I obey. It's not of works, not of works. It's not about us. It's about what Jesus Christ did for us on that cross and what he's doing for us now, making intercession for those who believe. And so I want people to know that you don't have to live a life of self condemnation. And you don't have to try to make yourself look more uh, qualified than you really are by going around condemning other folk. I
Right.
want people to understand that Jesus Christ has truly paid the price for our redemption, and that it is ours to receive by grace through faith in him. And when I see people get that, I see that pep in their step, I see that gleam in their eye. That makes me excited as a pastor. I can give God glory and I can give God the praise and say, thank you, God. When somebody can come to me and say, Pastor, I get it now. I get it. I need to stop being hard on myself. I need to stop being hard on other folk. This is not
Mhm.
about that. And when I see that church beginning to be transformed, and I see that church starting to reach out in the community and engaging people and helping people out there to recognize that we care about them, that's what makes me happy. I just left 2 churches that made me very happy. And by that I mean, when I saw the growth, when I saw the transformation,
Mhm.
right? The churches I just left, we don't have this conflict stuff going on. My
Yes.
board meetings, it's like having comic view and then with opening and closing prayer. And we
Mhm.
carry on and we laugh and we chat. And when we're done, the work gets done and nobody is hurt going home.
Yes.
That's what makes me happy as a pastor because I said they get it.
I love that. And I think we can all appreciate that. And we are looking forward to getting to that state as a church. I think that transformation is going to be critical to all of us and to our path and our walk with Christ. I know we're right at the top of the hour, Pastor. I'm just going to, one more time, any last words? That was just beautiful. I don't even know if you could make it any better than that. But are there any last words for us as a church, and just share anything you'd like to share with us?
So I want to quickly address Rochelle's question because
Yeah.
I have a feeling if I don't answer, she go ask me again anyway. So,
I
so
appreciate that.
she wants to know a little bit about how Ingrid and I came to be. Well,
Mhm.
some members of the church who have known me for a while, they already know this. The majority, I don't think, are aware. Um, I not only with my early life in terms of education and those kind of things, but I lost a spouse before. I lost a
Mhm.
spouse before, and you talk about God restores. God
Mhm.
restored. That's my theme, and after going through that experience of twice cancer and ultimately losing my first wife,
Mhm.
um, the Lord orchestrated literally through my first wife, not in terms of meeting Ingrid, but because of business transactions that I had nothing, well, I had something to do with, but when I was at Andrews, my late wife had made some travel arrangements for speakers I was bringing to Andrews when I was president of the Black Student Association. Ingrid
Mhm.
worked in travel back then. She was in New York, and after my wife passed away, and sometime after, we connected, and she was very kind, regarding my loss and everything. And on an occasion going to New York, um, I literally just to, as a part of my recovery from this whole thing, we met in person, and an interest developed not long after that, and here we are today. And this December will be 20 years since we've been married.
Wow.
Yeah, 20 years.
Oh,
I'm like 20 years already. Where did the time go?
yeah. Yeah.
That's how come. Um, so she, like many who are at New Hope, used to live in New York. I
Mhm.
never lived in New York myself. I like to visit, but I just don't see me living in New York.
Me
No.
either.
Two winters in Michigan. That's enough snow for the rest of my life.
Me
So,
neither. Mhm.
but in closing, I just want to say to New Hope as a church family, this journey together, this partnership has the potential to experience tremendous blessings, to see great things happen. And my mantra that I've been living by now, that I crafted many years ago, goes like this: great things are accomplished, not so much by great men, but by men who take a great God at his word. Let me say it again. Great things are accomplished, not so much by great men, but by men who take a great God at his word. And when I say men, I'm talking about human beings.
Mhm.
It's generic, not gender specific. I want you to know that we can trust God. God is a great God. Nehemiah trusted him. Moses trusted him. Hey, Daniel trusted him.
Yes.
Paul trusted him. And because they trusted God, because they believed that God can do anything, they stepped out in faith. I mean, Moses raised his rod because God told him, raise your rod. And the Red Sea parted into a boulevard. If he didn't trust God, he would never have seen the Red Sea part into a
Right.
boulevard. And so
Mhm.
I want you to trust God and know that God doesn't make mistakes. God sends every pastor to New Hope for a specific reason. I think
Yes.
you've figured out the reason why I'm here already. It's about what's next. It's
Yes.
next level excellence. All right, let's do this because God is counting on us. Thank you so much, Donna, for having me on this evening.
Thank you for joining us. And thank you, everyone that's online with us this evening. We appreciate you for sticking in there with us. This has been an amazing interview, Pastor. And I'm looking forward to the time where we can actually be sitting across from each other in person, in real life, having more discussions and getting to know you all so much more.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.